Okay, the seven churches of Asia, because we're going to pick up with the next church. I think I clicked on this. There it is. We just got done with Ephesus. And now we're going to go to Smyrna. That's our next church. And this is what ancient Smyrna kind of looked like. We kind of got this far last week, but it was a very nice city, very pretty city, very good harbor. And you can tell that Rome, or the city, they spent a lot of money. Look at all the colonnades. And the Romans absolutely loved columns. If you look at their cities, they're just columns everywhere, you know. So now Smyrna was a wealthy, self-governing city. They were allowed by the Roman Empire to have their own governor. They weren't sent a Roman governor, part of the political system of Rome. They were loyal enough, and they'd proved that loyalty, that they were allowed, as long as they, worked within Roman law, they were allowed to govern themselves. And there were several cities like that, they would be given that freedom. But it took a while to prove that you were really dedicated to the Romans and their system. But they were so loyal, they were allowed to be self-governing. And part of that was because they were really upfront in being enthusiastic about emperor worship. This is about the time, let me think where we are right here. We're about 30 or 40 years prior to when John's writing this. They started this whole idea where emperors were one of the gods. Not the only god like us, but a god. And you had to worship that emperor once a year in public, and it had to be recorded or you got in all kinds of trouble. And of course, this caused a lot of problems for the Christians because they're not going to. In fact, it's very likely that's why John is on the Isle of Patmos, because he wouldn't bow down to the emperor and say he's God and worship him. So once a year, every member of the Roman Empire had to go downtown where the main city fathers were, stand before the city fathers, raise their right hand and say, Caesar is Lord, is God. Remember, Caesar is just another word for king or emperor. So often people think Caesar is a name. It's not. It's the office, Caesar Augustus. We call Julius Caesar, just Caesar. But it just actually meant Julius the emperor, or Augustus, or whoever. Then they had to take a pinch of incense, drop it into the flames in front of the statue, and admit that he is God. And of course, the Christians can't. Now, during this time, a guy named Domitian was Caesar, and he was very fanatical about this. He's one of the ones, beginning, it was kind of like, all the various gods they had. You could worship the emperor or not. But then by the time of Domitian, it's like, you're going to worship the emperor or you're going to get in huge trouble. It was now compulsory for everybody. And so, like I said, that's probably why John was on the island in the first place. Now, in AD 23, that's 7 years before Jesus came on the scene, before he was killed on the cross, not before he came on the scene. So, in AD 23, they won the right to build the first emperor temple. That's how dedicated they were to this. They used their own money, all of that, and they built a temple to the emperor in Smyrna so that you could come worship him there. And so that made them very popular with the Roman government. Domitian was the ruler from AD 81 to 96, and that's when it became compulsory. Now, another issue that they had in Smyrna was they had a large, very aggressive, very anti-Christian Jewish population. And you'll see that as we read it. Jesus calls it the synagogue of Satan. He does not mince words. And he's talking about the Jewish synagogue in Smyrna because they were so against the Christians. So let's see, where am I? So here, let's go ahead and read Revelation 2, 8 to 11. And this is the persecuted church. This is a church, it's not in trouble, but it's being persecuted. And so they have to deal with that, and Jesus explains that to them. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last, who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Now, how would you like God to say that to you? Do not fear what you are about to suffer. That's kind of like when the doctor says, this is going to pinch. And then it feels like they're cutting your leg off, you know. So the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. And for 10 days you will have tribulation. How about this next one? Be faithful unto death. So guess what tells you what's coming? Really, really bad stuff if you've got to be faithful unto death. You know, let's see. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. So that's not what you want to hear as a church and as a Christian. It's the shortest of the messages. There's no problem. They're serving Jesus and loving all the way that they're supposed to. The only thing is, tribulation is coming to them. And you can see why. They're in a city that's focused on emperor worship, which means they're going to want everybody to worship the emperor, because they could lose their self-governing status if there were enough of them that refused to worship the emperor. So they're going to be all over them for that. And then you've got this large Jewish population that wants to destroy them. So they've got a lot of forces after them in this city. So these persecuted and beleaguered Christians needed to be reminded of who is speaking to them. That's why he starts out with, and notice in every one of these, it's the way Jesus describes himself is directly related to what's going on in the church. Like in this one, he's the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. He's reminding them that he has all power. They're about to come into terrible tribulation, suffering, but he's the one that was here before the beginning, and then, there is no end. He's the first and the last. He controls all things. But he's also telling them that this is his will, that this is going to happen. He's warning them it's coming and that he's going to allow it. Even though it's Satan doing it, he's still going to allow it. He has a purpose in it. They also need to hear the part that says who died and came to life, because he just told them they're going to be faithful till when? Death. And so there's many that may die, and they need to be reminded that's not a huge deal really, because he can bring you back to life, either on this earth or, of course, you go to be with the Father in heaven. So again, how he opens it and how he describes himself tells them a lot about what is coming. So, and notice that he knows the tribulation they're going through, but he does not say he will rescue them. He says they're going to go through it, even to the point of death. And when we're in those situations, what do we always pray for? Being rescued. Get me out. And to be quite honest, if we really understand the word, when we say that, we're actually asking God to violate his own will, because it's his will that put us there in the first place. The prayer we actually ought to pray is, like Jesus did when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, if this cup can pass from me, that'd be great. But if not, give me the strength to endure. Give me the ability to continue on, those kind of things. That's really a much more powerful and important prayer. We always want out, but you got to remember God's the one that brought it in the first place, and he has a point in it. He's going to use it to mold us into the image of Christ, to change things in our lives. Now, of course, I'm presupposing that you're doing your best to follow God and keep in step with the Holy Spirit. Now, if you're off doing your own thing, ignoring God, then you're on your own. Bad stuff's going to happen, but that's not part of God's will to mold you into the image of Christ, although it is God's will that he's going to let it happen to get you to come back to him. But that is what we have caused. So he's the one that's bringing this tribulation, allowing it, and therefore he's not going to rescue them. It also says they're very poor. Now that's by the standards of the world. They don't have a lot of money. And that's probably being caused by the fact that if they won't worship the emperor, then there are probably economic sanctions put on them. Things like you can't come to the marketplace, or you're taxed really heavily, or something of that nature. It doesn't tell us, but that's most likely why they're poor. And this happened in the early church because not only did you have to go and worship Caesar by this time, but all along in here, you had to go and give an offering to the market gods on market day. You had to go into the market. There was an altar there. You went up and you gave your altar and you worshiped the market gods in order to have a good market day. The Christians wouldn't, of course. And originally, they didn't really do a whole lot to them unless something bad happened. So if it was a really bad market day, who's going to get blamed? The Christians. Why? Because they didn't worship the market god and made him mad. Well, then everybody else is mad at you. And then after a while, it got to where they wouldn't allow you in the marketplace if you didn't worship the market god. And so the Christians had to come up with like an alternative, like a black market, market. And that would cause them to lose a lot of their wealth. So, now, Jesus is also totally aware of the slander being spread by the Jews in the community because they saw the church as a horrible blasphemy. You know, in the early days, the Jews were the ones that got saved originally in large numbers, but that changed very rapidly. Basically, by the time of Pentecost, it changed from Jews to Gentiles being the predominant people that get saved. And so then the Jews turned against Christianity. Of course, they had Jesus crucified on the cross because they saw it as a terrible blasphemy because Jesus said he was the Son of God. And as far as they were concerned, he was just a man, even though he would say to them things like, well, let my works speak for themselves. Can just a man bring a person back to life? Can just a man heal people that are obviously, withered legs, withered hands, stuff you could see, but it didn't matter. Even though only supernatural power could do that, they didn't want him changing their system of religion. So they wanted to destroy them. In fact, in many cases, it was the Jews who did far more damage to the church than the Gentiles or the Romans did during this time. So, let's see. Now, Jesus not only does not take them out of this suffering and tribulation, he warns them it's going to get worse to the point of death. You're going to have to be able to withstand this and persevere, some of you, to the point of death. Some are going into prison, some will die, which is exactly what Paul did in the beginning. He went out, Saul, hunting Christians, throwing them in prison, and having some of them killed. And that's still going on. And they're going to have severe tribulation. Now, he does say it's for a short time. He says for 10 days. That could be a literal 10 days, but most likely it's not. It's metaphorical for just a short, undefined period. But there's going to be severe tribulation for a time. But he's also telling them withstand it because it will come to an end. It's not going to go on forever. And, we all know that we can stand something a lot more easily if we know it's not going on forever, that at some point it will end, that type of thing. So let's see. Now, all of the different churches we go through here, they're all going to have that same passage to listen. Listen. He who has an ear, hear what the Spirit says. That means hear with your spiritual ears, with the spiritual part of your brain. And also, he tells them if they persevere, they're going to be given a crown far more important than the crown of the emperor. And I think that's why he chose the crown as what he would give them. In every case, if you do what Jesus says, there's a reward. In this case, he says that they'll get a crown, the crown of life. And I believe the reason he chose crown is because the emperor wears a crown, and that's the whole problem here is emperor worship. And yet he says, you're going to get a better crown. Stick with me, stick with God, stand up for, your belief, don't give in, and you'll get a crown that's eternal, not this temporary one that they use. I think he's also reminding them that the crown Jesus wears, he's a far more powerful king than Domitian. He's the ruler of all creation, God of gods, King of kings. Now, Jesus had no problems with this church, none other than that it be able to persevere during this time of tribulation. But they didn't have any issues that had to be corrected. He'd just hang in there. And again, as we said before, these 7 churches will define the situation of any church that will ever exist. It will fit into one of these. And so down through time, there have been many churches just like this that are persecuted. Today, churches are persecuted if they try to have a church in Muslim countries, China, other places like that. And so it's still going on. It'll go on till the end. But he just tells them, be faithful unto death. Just hang in there. Okay, the next one is Pergamum. That's the next city that we find. I think I've got one of my slides out of where I didn't put it in there. Huh. This is what they call the citadel of Pergamum. I couldn't actually find an artist's rendering of what the city looked like I did with Smyrna. But I found this. They call it the citadel. It's up on the hill above the rest of the town, and it's where all the high-level people are and live, where their offices are, where the temples are, all that type of stuff. Yeah, basically, yeah. And so just wanted you to see all of the temples they had. Sanctuary of the ruler cult, Trajan's temple, an emperor, temple of Athena, temple of Dionysius, and then they have what's called the Great Altar, which is very important to this about Pergamum. And then in this letter to Pergamum, he's going to describe Satan's throne. They live where Satan has a throne. And what it is it's called the Great Altar there. And this is a model of what it looked like with the steps. And then the altar was in here. And then there's an exact replica of it just to give you some idea of its size with people walking up and down. It's enormous. It's an enormous altar. And it's an altar that is to Zeus. And I think to Zeus, and there was someone else, now I can't remember who they are. So let's take a look at what it says. Revelation 2:12-17. And to the angel of the church at Pergamum write, the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. Now, that should get your attention. Because what is that sharp two-edged sword generally used for? For judgment. So when Jesus leads by saying, I'm the one with the sharp two-edged sword, that means bad stuff's coming. You're in a lot of trouble. He says in verse 13, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. This. Yet you hold fast my name, and you did not deny my faith, even the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you. Then he repeats the same idea where Satan dwells, where he has this huge altar, Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you. Where am I? You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, so that they might eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality. So also you have some who hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Therefore repent. If not, I will come to you soon and war against them with the sword of my mouth. Now, he's not coming against the whole church. He doesn't say that. He says, like at Ephesus, remember, he said, I'm coming, don't straighten out, you're going to cease to exist. The whole church was going to go away. In this one, he just says he's going to go after the ones that are following the teachings of Balaam and the Nicolaitans, and he's going to go after them with the sword. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except he who receives it. So this church has some problems, but not everybody's in trouble. And so we kind of list this up there with the what we would call the compromised church. They've allowed false teachings in, and they're not doing anything about it. They're not making them repent or leave, which is what they should be doing. Now, Jesus describes himself as having the two-edged sword, a sign of judgment. So we know some difficult things are coming. And what he said was, I'm going to go after them with the two-edged sword, very likely meaning he might even kill them. You know, if they don't repent, if they don't straighten up these people that are leading the church astray. It could also mean just, it may be that however they get removed besides death might be kind of violent, you know, painful, difficult, because that's what the sword signifies. So, I clicked my thing too soon. That one was supposed to take us to the great throne of Pergamum. Yeah.
These different communities, the temples, were they Jewish temples or Roman temples?
No, these are all temples to false gods in all these places. To Roman gods, Greek gods, a lot of different kinds of gods. They had hundreds and hundreds. Also, remember, the Roman Empire is a bit of a melting pot of people from all over the world, and they all bring their gods with them. And in many cases, the Romans had no problem letting them build temples to their gods, you know, as long as they followed the Roman Empire, you know, followed the laws and rules. So no, these are all of these are to false gods. See, for the Jews, there's only one temple, Jerusalem, no more. God don't build any, nothing. That's it. Now, they did have synagogues all over, but not temples. No, a temple was in Jerusalem. I'm trying to think of what time period we're in here. Yeah, because you had Herod's temple by this time. So now they had a lot of synagogues. Now, I don't know if you know this, the synagogues started up when they all got deported to Babylon. Remember, back in the history of Israel, Nebuchadnezzar comes, defeats all of their fortified cities, surrounds Jerusalem, deports a bunch of people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, all those guys, that type of thing. And he levels the temple at that time. It gets rebuilt later, but he levels it. But these people are spread all over the world. A lot of them went back to Babylon. That's where he took most of them. And they didn't have a temple anymore, but they needed a way to worship and a way to learn. So they started the synagogue system, which is more similar to like our church, a building in their community that they pay to build and they go to on the Sabbath to worship and to have classes and all that kind of thing. And then from that, they brought that idea back with them when they were allowed to return to Israel from Babylon. And then it continued to spread throughout the empire, wherever Jews were. It also allowed them to keep teaching their young people their history, the Bible, all that kind of stuff. They didn't have to be at the temple in Jerusalem. And so we still have that synagogue system to this day. So let's see. Now, Jesus tells the people at Pergamum, he knows exactly where they are. A lot of times we wonder, does God really know what's going on here, in your life or whatever? And he knows exactly where they are. They're where Satan's throne is. He knows where it's a place where Satan has enormous power and influence. So it's going to be very hard on the church, because where Satan has a lot of power and influence, that continually tries to sneak its way into the church through the people. And so the leaders of that church have to be very, very careful about really testing everyone and understanding what they believe before you let them become a part of the church, because they can bring a lot of these bad beliefs with them about these false gods and things of that nature. And so I can really relate to this church because it's the situation that my church in Sedona was in. We are at one of the premier places for the New Age religion in the world. And Sedona, at that point in time, had something like 6 million visitors a year, most of who came for New Age stuff. Medical procedures, all different kinds of things. But that's why they're there. And when you go through it, you learn pretty quick the whole city is kind of focused on the New Age and what it believes, because that's who's drawn there. A lot of New Age businesses in Sedona. You can get your aura cleaned. You can get some nice crystals. You can get all kinds of stuff. You can go hike to the vortexes. And if you stand in a vortex, everything in your life that's bad will get fixed and made good. Never happens, but that's what they believe. And you guys familiar with the vortexes, of what they are? Because they're energy hotspots and all that kind of stuff. Usually there's a native prayer wheel, big, like 20, 30 feet across, that are built out of rocks with spokes and then a center, and then you leave an offering on that and stand there, and then the energy from the earth will clean everything up and make your life better.
Anyway, supposedly the human, but if he's suffering, he can go in there. If he believes in that, he should be healed.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying.
Never works.
And it doesn't work, but that's what they
But that does not deter their faith in any way, shape, or form. It's just, I don't know if you guys knew about when there was a group that thought Bell Rock was a spaceship. And thousands of them came and stood on it because, according to their prophecies, the mothership was going to be flying by and Bell Rock was going to take off and take them up. And they all stood there all day and all night until the next day. Nothing ever happened. Did that change their beliefs? Nope. And you're like, wow. Something happened that 100% conclusively proved the Bible is wrong. I'd be done. I wouldn't mess with it anymore. That's never happened and it never will. But I'm just amazed at other beliefs people have, that one of their main beliefs proves to be untrue and it doesn't faze them in the least. That also happened with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Originally, when they founded that belief system, there were just supposed to be the 144,000 witnesses in the book of Revelation. Now, of course, the book of Revelation is extremely clear they're Jewish, but that didn't bother anybody. And they decided that's who they were. And they created this whole different heaven religion system than what we actually believe, even though they claim to believe the Bible. Well, they had a problem, though, when their membership went beyond 144,000. They got up to 2 or 3 million. Well, now what are you going to do? So then they changed a core belief that, no, here's what actually goes on is there's 144,000 super saints and an unlimited number of the rest of us. And then you have to do whatever they tell you to do in order to get moved up to a super saint position type of thing. So, and that you'll notice that with any wrong belief system or cult or whatever, they will almost always run into reality, will come crashing into them, and they will have to change a core belief, which Christianity's never had to do. Not ever have we had to change any core belief that's in the Bible. Never. Because it's written by the God that created it all. So, of course, that's not going to happen. But anyway, so, we were in the midst, so I really understand where this church is. Now, my people, we didn't have false teachings of the church, but we were where Satan has his throne. You know, because that's a very powerful. We had people in Sedona actively praying to Satan and other gods that the pastors would get sick or killed or the churches would burn down and things of that nature. And it was going on all the time. And the New Age, literally, they accept every belief on the planet except Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and they all come from the same source, the Bible. You know, they're a little different, but yet that's still where, like even Islam, it's built on the Old Testament. There's a lot of the Old Testament that's in the Quran because that's what Muhammad, part of what he used. So I was in the heart of New Age beliefs where Satan had a throne. And I believe absolutely that that is the final religion prior to the Antichrist making them worship him. That it'll be the world religion. It's the only religion I know of that can accept every belief except ours. Therefore, anything can fit inside it. Hindu, Buddhist. In fact, New Age is really just Hinduism and Buddhism repackaged for the Western mind, is what it really is. And it all came from the 1960s when that generation wanted to abandon what their parents believed. And a lot of the people like the Beatles and others were the ones that went over to Asia, got into these mystic religions, and then brought them back and had a huge influence over the people of that time. And that's why it's still very much integral into that whole world. Now, so let's look at some, remember I told you last time that there are many Christians who have New Age beliefs and don't know it. That's how pervasive it is. It's everywhere around us, such as karma. Ever heard of karma? You'll even hear Christians talk about karma. I think they have no idea what it is, but yet they will. I mean, most people believe it means do good, receive good, do evil, receive evil. Now, in the original Hinduism, karma is simply, in Hinduism, you got to keep coming back and being reincarnated until you get it all right. So if you don't get it all right and you die, you come back as something else.
You can come back as a different thing. You can come back as an animal.
Right. That's how it's Hindu.
Work your way
Right.
up.
That's how Hindu beliefs, even though that's what the basis of New Age is repackaged for the Western mind. We're not going to buy into the fact that you could come back as a mosquito. You know, with Americans, it's always you come back as a human of some kind. But no, and that's why in India they won't, that's why they're vegetarians. You know, you can't eat animals. That might be an uncle, a cousin, who knows. Why they won't eat cows in a place where people are starving, cows walking all over the place, extremely healthy and well fed, you know. They won't kill rats. I don't know if you know this, but for a long, you know how India's always had a problem with feeding their population. They've always had an issue because they have such a huge population. And it was never an issue of not having enough land or be able to grow enough crops. The problem was they won't kill the rats. So you can imagine store a whole bunch of grain up, do nothing to the rats and let them just, you know, continue to repopulate and all that. And pretty soon you're going to have an enormous number of rats and they're going to eat everything up. And that's what they did. They would eat up all the food. There wasn't any for the people. What was funny was when Christians would come, like missionaries and stuff, and go out into these agricultural communities and say, like, because in a lot of these areas, you'll notice that when someone gets saved, a few people get saved, eventually it's like the whole village gets saved. It's amazing how that happens. So the village gets saved, predominantly, what do they start doing? Killing the rats. Pretty soon, they're rich compared to all their neighbors and have more than enough food because they're killing the dadgum rats off. You know, and that's one of those beliefs. But karma is, in the Hinduism, means that if you did bad in this life, you'll come back as a mosquito or a rat or a dung beetle or something. And if you do good, you come back as a better and better animal until you finally make it to perfection, nirvana. But it takes who knows how long. Mary?
All those rats, don't they get illnesses?
Oh yeah, I mean, India's plagued with all kinds of plagues. They actually have temples where they worship rats, where you go in and let them crawl all over you and you feed them. And I mean, it's amazing, you know. I know if I was there and I was a person that was starving and there were rats everywhere, I'd be going, we're having rat for dinner. We're not starving. All right, so we've got karma. We've got many gods. Now what I did was I took these from a lady that was a hardcore New Ager that got saved, and she was writing an article about a lot of the New Age beliefs that work their way into the church. And believe it or not, many gods. We are children of God, therefore we are many gods in our own right. Now that's a New Ager that actually believes there is a God. Most don't. They believe everything's God, and not just a God. But since we're children of God, well, however you want to classify that, we must be many gods in our own right. We're not, but that's what they believe. How about the power is within you? You don't need God's power, you have the power. That's a big, big, big New Age belief. And all of the New Age teachings are about releasing that power that's within you that you don't know is there. And I don't know if you ever watched Oprah Winfrey. I hope not. But if you did, that was one of the things she said all the time. She claimed to be a Christian, but she actually was the most powerful priestess of the New Age that has ever existed. She dragged more Christians into New Age beliefs than anybody that's ever lived. Because I could get myself basically tarred and feathered by going to many, many, many churches in this country, standing in the pulpit and saying, Oprah Winfrey is the high priestess of New Age. The women in that church would run me out of town because they all watched her and loved her and apparently didn't really pay attention to what she was saying because she had all kinds of New Age beliefs that were taught in most of her stuff that she did. So you have the power. And then there's another big one, oneness. We can become righteous with God by our own effort. We can become one with God by our effort. But the Bible says the opposite. There's no chance. You have to be born again and all that kind of stuff. So more that could make their way into your life, into the church was, how you ever heard this one? Follow your heart, follow your bliss. That means follow whatever makes you feel good. That's, Does that sound like that sounds like fun. Let's follow whatever feels good at the moment. And that's what it means, follow your heart. They also tell you all the time, only take a job that, fulfills your heart and fulfills your passion and blah. And I'm like, no, most of us, that's not going to happen. Some people are lucky enough that happens. But most of us, we have to take a job to feed our families. Whatever that job may be, because a lot of things that where our heart goes, you don't make any money at. So can't necessarily do it. How about this one? I know quite a few Christians who believe this. All roads lead to heaven. If you just really believe what you say you believe, and you live it, then you'll get to your heaven just like I'll get to mine. Meaning there's an unlimited number of heavens, which makes absolutely no sense when you think about it. But there are quite a few. I got a cousin that believes that is a Baptist and goes to church every week and all that kind of stuff. Then the last one is the law of attraction. Don't know if you've heard of that one. This is done a lot in financial issues. That if you have the right New Age beliefs, you think positively and have faith that the universe will send money to you. There's a lady named Susie Orm who's a really powerful New Age teacher on finances. That's kind of the hallmark of her whole system, is that the universe will bring you money. It's the law of attraction, or whatever, power, whatever you want. Again, we all know that reality says that's total nonsense. So, now the last one I'm going to put up there is most people don't realize that abortion is also a foundational belief in New Age, as are most feminists are all wrapped together into the New Age beliefs. And abortion is because, that's a woman's right to choose, and she's got to be able to do what she wants to because she's got to follow her bliss. And right now, it's just not a good time to have a baby. So you just get rid of it, Now, here's the part that I find very sad, and what I'm about to say is not a political statement, but it is a truth about who we are on this earth and what about political parties believe, and we have to be careful when we align ourselves with one. Okay, you probably know where I'm going, but many believers, people who claim to be born-again Christians, are also very much involved in the Democratic platform. And I'm not saying, you can't be a Democrat. What I'm saying is, if you are a part of that and you vote for those candidates, then you are approving of all that they stand for. That's what the Bible says. And we are held accountable for it. Because if all the Christians actually vote, what's the largest voting bloc in America? By far. Control every election if we wanted to. Christians. 30% of America claims to be Bible-believing Christians. And if that's true, then in any given election, we can control 30% of the vote. If we did, that means we vote anybody we want to into office. The problem is too many Christians don't vote according to the Bible. There's some other part of like the Democratic platform that they like. And I've had people say to me, well, yeah, but I don't believe in abortion, and I'm not part of that. I'm like, yes, you are. You're electing candidates who that's part of their platform. So you need to understand this. And here's how I put it. We all have to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Do you want to stand, or do I want to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and explain why I was involved in the murder of millions of innocent babies? No, not ever. So, and again, maybe that's why there's so few people here. It's not a political statement. It's just we need to understand that the Bible says that we are held accountable for what we approve of. And we need to be very aware of that. And I even heard him asking some pastors from the South one time, because there's a lot of there are Christians that say they're Democrats in the South. And they asked him, why don't you teach on things like abortion and different things on the platform? It's too divisive. That was their answer. It's too divisive. So you're not going to tell your people the truth because it's too divisive? Oh, boy.
Well, another one, a big one is Israel.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Supporting Israel? Absolutely. You cannot be a born-again Christian and not support Israel. You can't, because the Bible is very clear about that. You know, it says pray for the peace of Israel. It says pray for Israel as a country. You know, it just goes on and on. That's God's chosen people. Don't mess with them. So we have to be very careful of that. And unfortunately, so many people that do vote in those ways, they don't fully understand what they're doing, what they're voting for, because they've never investigated it thoroughly. You know, that type of thing. So, in fact, I have a friend that had another friend call him and say, I want you to call my sister-in-law because she's very heavily into the democratic system, but says she's a born-again Christian and she believes in abortion. So he called her and was talking to her. And what he does is he brings up dogs and puppies. So you have your dog spayed, and yet it didn't take, and you don't know it. And she goes out and gets pregnant, and you know you didn't really want the puppies in the first place. So you're going to kill them all. As soon as they're born, you're going to have your husband take a hammer and bang them in the head. And she was just freaking out. He's like, that's abortion. You know, in many states like California allow it up to the point of birth, where they go and drill a hole in the head, scramble the brains, and pull it out, and then pull the baby out. You know, that kind of stuff. When he was done, she was weeping and bawling, you know, because she had never sat down and thought about it.
What gets me is art being so into abortion, and that's like
What?
AARP.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that AARP has very liberal beliefs,
Yeah.
and the candidates that they support and all that kind of stuff, you know, so.
It's supposed to be an old people's group.
Yeah, well, you got to remember those young people in the 60s are old people now, you know, and so that's why everything is. What's that?
Got all of us on that one.
Yeah, I was born in the 50s, so I'm good. But, Larry?
Birth control such as a pill,
Yeah.
would it be considered abortion?
No, because those don't allow it to happen in the first place. You know, now there is what do they call it, the morning after pill. That is, because it kills what came alive. The others just don't allow it to happen, so there is no life. You know, so.
As far as women's right to choose, they should have chose
Not to do it.
not to do that.
Well, you know, that's why I told you before, the 4D ultrasounds that they're using in the crisis pregnancy centers and stuff have an over 90% success rate in getting women to change their minds who come in convinced they need an abortion, and then they see the baby, and it is a baby, and they've been told it's just a lump of flesh, it doesn't look like anything, it's not human, it's not alive. They see a baby, and it's like, nope, and 90% will change their minds and have the baby. You know, it's all about, I mean, I'm just amazed that people, well, I guess I shouldn't be amazed. Our education system has trained all of our people that are under like about 40 years of age to ask no questions. The experts all know what they're doing, and you don't ask questions, because in school they were reprimanded if they asked questions. Like, you don't sit in the class with the professor and ask a question. You just regurgitate what he tells you. Harry?
It boils down to don't ask no questions and do what I tell you.
Yep. Don't ask any questions and do what you're told. And then you see it. How in the world could we end up with all these people, all these college-age kids out rioting and protesting on behalf of Hamas, the murdering terrorists. It's absolutely astounding, you know. The proof is overwhelming that the terrorists, that when they came into Israel, they killed babies, they raped women. And I've heard them ask people that, that's not real, that's not true, it didn't happen. It's like, really? Even though the IDF has pictures, the news has pictures, these people, you know, there's overwhelming evidence that matter, you know. And I never thought that I'd see America turn anti-Semitic, but yet we have a whole group that is violently anti-Semitic.
Isn't that what Revelation says going into the end of it?
Yep, that's what it does. It says Israel will be hated more and more as we get closer and closer to the end. And these people, right now, the predominance, it's funny, the predominance of the kids out there protesting are from the Ivy League schools, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, places like that. And in fact, I don't know if you saw some of the news where some of the donors, the big money donors that, you know, came from those universities are cutting off the funds because they're not against Israel. And they're like, what the heck is, they haven't been keeping an eye on what their school has been doing. And then the funny thing is, you start dealing with the money, policies start to change. You know, in fact, I saw that the lady president of one of them resigned because it was under her tenure that this all happened. You know, and then she tries to say she's against it, but like, you can't be telling the truth because you've been the president a long time, and this is what happened under your tenure, you know, type of thing.
But then they gave her another position.
Of course, you know, yeah, of course. They're not actually going to change anything, you know, that kind. They're just trying to make it look like they're changing something. But yeah, it's amazing. And the scary part is, as I've told you before, the fortunes of a country are directly tied to how it treats Israel. It's plain and simple. We became the most powerful, wealthiest country the world has ever known, primarily because we've been Israel's allies since the very beginning. The founding fathers were extremely pro-Israel. And they wanted to write some of it into our original documents. They didn't, but that's how much they were for it. You know, same with Canada. They were very pro-Israel. And out of the Western nations, you know, Canada's very wealthy and doing very well, so are we. But as you'll notice, as we begin to move away from Israel, what's happening to our economy, our politics, our morals, all that? It's all going away. And people don't believe it, but the proof is overwhelming that how you treat Israel is directly related to what happens to you as a nation, type of thing. So, okay. Now, even with all this pressure from their environment, the emperor worship and all of that, they held fast to Jesus. They didn't deny him, even when they had already killed one of their people. Antipas was killed because of his faith. So part of the church is doing what's right. Now, unfortunately, others are participating in the false teaching of Balaam or tolerated it without doing anything. And in God's eyes, you're just as guilty. And that's, you know, if we're in a church and we know there's false teachings going on in that church, we need to stand up and say something, because if we don't, we're guilty. We're just as guilty as the person teaching it. And yeah, that's hard to do, and yeah, people get mad at you, but nonetheless, it's got to be done. And people are very reluctant to do it, unfortunately. So, I don't know, we don't have any time. From here, we're going to go into talking about, because don't know if you guys are all familiar with Balaam and Balak, or however you want to pronounce their names, but that's the teachings that they said they're following here at Smyrna, or I forgot what church I'm on. What church am I on, guys? Is it Smyrna? No, it's the next one after that. But now I've lost my plate. Anyway. No, that's the good church. So anyway, we'll go into next week about Balaam and Balak and about who they are and what happened. Because to me, it's one of those very strange stories in the Bible, much like Melchizedek. This person appears, this guy Balaam. He's a prophet of God, sort of. It's weird. We're told nothing about it. It's just this one place we have information about him, just like Melchizedek, and then that's it. It's never mentioned again. And he's a prophet of God, but this is way back in the Old Testament before there was, you know, any of this was being done. In fact, he's called to come curse Israel as they're trying to take over the land of Canaan. A king, Balak, calls Balaam and says, come and curse them for me. Because apparently he was known for being able to curse peoples and bad stuff would happen. And that's what he calls him for. So, all right, we'll have to stop there, though.